Hello and welcome to Events Dear Boy, a new podcast for anyone involved in business events. If you're a conference producer, corporate event organizer, or events agency, then we're here for you. We want to share the highs and the lows, the best practices and the horror stories. You can expect ideas and inspiration, and maybe some laughs too.
And if you're a speaker at these events, then we're here for you too. We'll be talking about how you do it, what makes speakers nervous, and how it feels when it all goes well or terribly.
My name is Catherine McNamara and I'm the marketing lead at the talent agency Pomona Partners and someone who has organised many business events in my working life. Alongside me is Pomona Partners founder and a veteran of 1,000 speaking gigs, Tom Cheesewright.
Each episode, we're going to be joined by a guest from the business events space, either an organiser or a speaker. We'll ask them to share their experiences, both good and bad, and their tips for other people in their position.
And this week, we are absolutely delighted to be joined by Dan Sodergren. Welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Thanks very much for having me. It's lovely you are so delighted that I'm here. I feel honoured to be part of it.
It's great to have you here. So let's jump in at the deep end. Can you tell us a little bit about your role, what you do?
I do lots of keynote speaking. I'm a public speaker as well. I'm also the joy of being an author. Some people on the BBC and other places call me a tech futurist. I'd rather be called a billionaire philanthropist rather than tech futurist, but that's a different point entirely. I've most probably been public speaking and doing this kind of stuff really for at least 20 years, if not more. And I specialise in talking about the future of work, technology, and now, of course, artificial intelligence, which is what everyone wants to be talking about. However, I've been talking about AI almost before it was called AI in some respects, without getting too silly about it. So yeah, I have the joy of talking about digital transformation, company cultures, and all sorts of stuff, not only on podcasts like this, but also on stage and on radio and the TV.
Those topics might sound in some way different things, but they are intrinsically connected, aren't they? You can't talk about the future of work without talking about AI and vice versa as well.
I mean, yeah, absolutely, Tom. This is all part of what they call the fifth industrial revolution, which is what I've been talking about for a bit. But also, as you know, I've been talking about the future of work for 10 years, and I was talking about hybrid work and using Zoom when everyone thought I was crazy. And then, of course, COVID and other things happened, and then all of a sudden, everyone could remote work, and actually, it wasn't as spooky as everyone thought. And so, yeah, when you talk about the future of work, you have to talk about technology. And nowadays, when you talk about technology, you have to talk about artificial intelligence. So, yeah, they are all linked together. It's just been a lot of luck, in my opinion, that all these things happen. It's only because of the people I met when I was very young and just being a massive geek. It's been very unfashionable to talk about a lot of this stuff for 10 years. And now everyone's like, oh my goodness, overnight success of AI. And it's like, not really. It started in 1967. But this is the great thing about being a futurist, of course, is you have the joy of sometimes getting it quite right. And everyone thinks you're really clever because of it.
So, Dan, what is your backstory and how on earth did you become a speaker?
Wow. Okay, great story. It all started in 1976. No, I'm not going to do that. That's too far back. That's when I was born. Actually, my first gig as a public speaker was because I realised I wasn't talented enough to do the talent show when I was about 13 and 14. I didn't have a specific talent. Yeah. So my specific talent was comparing and public speaking around other people's amazing talents, was hosting the show, right? Because I wasn't good enough to be part of the show. Now, you could argue that continued when I became things like, a DJ manager, not a DJ. When I ran nightclubs, wasn't the DJ again. So not always not the start of the show, but certainly not always the bridesmaid, not the bride or whatever. But I did have the joy having a lot of people around me that believed I had a talent in comparing when I was very young. And my talent for talking has been literally from day dot. Now, that could be seen as talent. I would argue it's more of a nervous disposition and a mental health problem. But depends which way you look at it, So, yeah, I've enjoyed being on stage for a long time, but not as the person who has to ad lib and talk rather than the person that has to do the thing. If that answers your question. So yeah, my background's a very long time. From a public speaking and actually getting paid for it point of view, I came back from Mexico with something like £3.25 to my name after a very, very exciting, very, very failed business exploit over there, and came back and had no money. And an old business mentor of mine said, can you help us out? Can you do a gig at MMU talking about the company you started, you sold, and how you got to Mexico? And that's what started my public speaking role, because I did that and they loved it. And then two people were, one was from a council, another person was from a university. They asked me to do more, and that kind of literally just snowballed into what I do now. And, just been getting better and better at it as time has gone on. And so, lucky enough for me, been working with bigger and bigger clients until now I work with household names. So yeah, it's been a roller coaster. But as everyone knows with public speaking, it's not all as glamorous as people make out and people think.
You mentioned the like who's booking you now, but what sort of events are they? What sort of roles are you fulfilling in those events? What sort of audiences are you speaking to?
Well, I mean, it's changed over the years. I started off really talking to students, and to be fair, I was doing some training for a university just the other day. But nowadays, it's much more not around students, but it's around corporate leaders. It's leadership of larger businesses. My first gigs were really around startup and marketing. Now it's about company culture, future of work, artificial intelligence. That tends to mean that the audiences I'm talking to are, C-suite, leadership, those kind of people. And also organisations that want to know a bit more about innovation and want to inspire people. One of my big jobs is inspiring people to make a change in what they're doing, especially around their business, but also around their lives, without getting too kind of imperial about it and a little bit too life coachy about it. The reality is that happy employees that are doing more things and are happier actually make businesses better. So it's great. You could teach the leaders to become better and to use artificial intelligence more and all these different things. We talk around technology and the future of work. And yes, leadership change is a big part of it, but actually it's about company change. And that's really about inspiring individuals. Without having people in your company know why they should make this change, you actually don't make a change at all. Leadership can say, let's all do this. But of course, you've got to have inspired people underneath it all doing the thing. But that's kind of my job. I go in I think inspire doesn't come from the Latin to mean breathe into or set fire to or something. And that's kind of what I do. I go in and breathe fire. Doesn't make any sense. But I go in and I just realised saying set fire to things sounds awful.
Dan the Dragon Sodergren.
Absolutely. I'm big on Dragon's Den. I actually have worked with a few dragons actually. So there you go. There's a truth of the matter. That's a different story. But the idea of going in and inspiring is really what I'm about. That's kind of my
I think that's really important, because one of the things that I always tell prospective bookers about you is you inject an enormous amount of energy into the room. You are such I have been known to describe you as Tigger. You are such an energetic speaker, and people love that. Like the feedback we get on you, a lot of it is about just that high energy and how much they really enjoyed that.
Well, it's something that it's because I'm passionate about it. My TEDx talk was about the future of work is what you love. It's not about what you think and it's not what you feel. It's actually what you love. And it's something that I truly believe that if you're not excited by the subject you're talking about, then in reality, you shouldn't be talking about that subject. That is one of the things, right? So one of the quick wins is making sure you're passionate about something, but also, with the integrity to it and with the authenticity in it, you kind of, the only reason why I have so much energy and so much excitement is because the world of the future of work and technology and AI naturally lends itself to getting extremely excited about what's going to be around the corner. We're not living in a world where the tech future is bad. We're living in a world where the tech future is going to be one of the biggest social movements this world has ever seen. I'm just extremely lucky to be living through it. And I think sometimes, you just have to give that information to the audience. And sometimes, and this is the joy of public speaking, this is one of the great rights of public speaking, I suppose, is you get given the chance to infuse your audience. To be a public speaker is a huge opportunity, but also a kind of huge responsibility. If you're taking up people's time and there's 100 or 1,000, even 10 people in the room, and you're wasting their time by not giving them your energy and your input and your understanding and your thought leadership, then really you shouldn't be doing that job. And that's the difference, of course, between public speaking, I suppose, and just presenting. And presenting, of course, is a very different thing entirely. But thank you that people think I bring energy into the room. That's kind of my job. I'm always given the after dinner slots, is all I know. I'm always the guy that goes on after lunch to inspire people, after breakfast to make sure everyone's awake. So that's got to be a positive.
So Dan, you've talked about kind of what you kind of love about the subject matter and that energy, but if you to expand that about kind of that kind of speaking experience, what is it that really gets your juices flowing in terms of that as a thing for speaking?
Well, as I say, I mean, I take it quite seriously. So I think that sometimes you're given a great opportunity to do things. Like if you can change people's lives because you've done something and you've done a talk for 15 minutes and they've written something down and they've taken the decency to listen to you a lot, and have the decency to listen to you a lot. That's a great honor and responsibility, right? So I've been very lucky that I've had lots of people come up to me afterwards and said, I really love what you say. It really resonated with me. And therefore, I've made these changes in my business. I then had people come back to me months later and say, when you did that talk, this is what we then did. And I get a huge amount of personal satisfaction from that. I've even had people that come back to me like a decade later, which is brilliant. Say, we changed what we did. We're now doing this. It'd be nice if they gave me shares in the company at the same time. Or maybe even a bottle of wine or two. I don't know. The point being is, but the actual reality, and joking aside, is that's what I get personal satisfaction from. I get personal satisfaction from creating that change or being part of some of that change. And if it's, they start reading books around the subject or they remember a slide that I put in, or something, a little comment. I mean, literally the other day, someone quoted back to me something I'd said, literally about 15 years ago. About their business, which was very small at the time and now is pretty large. And I really like that. Now, of course, you could argue that's a massive ego on my part. And yeah, that it's most probably true too. But I think as public speakers, we're not necessarily the most shy and retiring folk. And if we are, then perhaps we're not necessarily right for the gig. However, I have met and absolutely love people who deliver things very differently to me, because there are some public speakers who are brilliant doing the opposite to what I do, which is talk very quickly, infuse the room, and get people excited. I've met other public speakers who are just amazing at almost doing the opposite, and I've got a lot of time for someone who's got that talent.
What's the worst public speaking experience you've had?
I don't like to ever talk about the worst. There's lots of learning experiences that I've had. Yeah, like for example, a great one is don't do, and this is more to do with training as well, but don't do things live is something that I learned over the years, because technology can fail, right? So what I mean by that is if you're teaching pay-per-click advertising, which I was very famously in this basement in Romania, and luckily I'd prepped all the slides for the internet not to work. And the organizer came to this a good 10, 15 years ago and came to me and said, oh, yeah, sorry, the internet doesn't work here. Now, if I'd gone for doing it live, I'd have nothing. And so I would have been absolutely, I'm not talking about, it was in front of government officials and all sorts of, it was a big old thing, right? It was a big thing. It was actually with one of the Dragon Festivals thing. So making sure that you don't rely on technology, that's a big one for me. That's a big learning curve for me. Yeah. One of my favorite gigs that I did years and years and years ago, I did a talk for another business organization, and I was in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of literally a hill on the side of somewhere in Liverpool. And I turned up and they literally had nothing, right? Luckily for me, I kind of brought my projector, I brought this thing, but I literally had to almost build the stage. I actually had to build the thing that I was going to project onto through 2 tables and a piece of white cloth. I mean, literally, it was brilliant. So I was talking about guerrilla marketing. It was the most guerrilla public speaking gig I ever did. And it was literally about guerrilla marketing. So it's brilliant. Had to build my but I would also say other funny things that happen. I did a talk once where someone used AI to write my intro for me. And because they used GPT 3.5, it was just mainly hallucination. And they'd kind of left it as a surprise. And they were like, didn't you know, Dan? It's just, I think it literally made out that I like traveling, which is true, love traveling. But I held the Guinness Book of Records for the amount of continents gone in a day. And this poor chap said, absolute nonsense, right? And they just said this. And I was like, and of course my talk was about AI. So I kind of came on slightly sheepishly and was like, okay, gonna have to segue into AI also hallucinates. By the way, no disrespect, but all of what you just said there is a bit of a lie. So that's a bit of a worry about AI. Now, of course, this was many months ago, and they were using GPT 3.5, but it's a great warning about the future of work. Segue into what I talk about. Do not use GPT 3.5 when you're trying to do stuff. It makes things up. It's like having a 16-year-old intern. Use GPT-4. That's like a 21-year-old. The GPT-5 is going to be more like a 35-year-old. But that's when we get into the. It's going to be extremely exciting what's going to happen then. But there we go. So just my worst thing, I suppose, is being introduced wrong. The amount of times I'm introduced wrong and they say my name wrong is really pretty funny, and that happens to be quite often on radio and things. And that can be a bit of an ego bash. But yeah, I think the Liverpool building my own stage and presentation thing, and then AI lying about my intro, that's probably my two favourite stories.
I'm still known by one of my BBC friends as Dom Cheeseman, because the BBC once captioned me as Dom Cheeseman rather than Tom Cheesewright.
The amount of times I get Sodergren, there's so many, and it's genuine. Of course, you can't. I mean, I did it once. I've done it once where I was on radio, and I had to say to them, "No offence, but that's actually not my name." And the reason why I could say that is because it was linking to AI getting things wrong. So I was like, it proves though that you're human because it's not an AI bot, because you've also got that wrong, which I thought was really funny, but actually they did not. So I thought it was hilarious. That was brilliant. Brilliant segue. They were a bit cross, but they got my name wrong, for goodness sake. I literally had asked like 30 seconds before, how do you say your name? And obviously they told him, and then that person got it completely wrong. But anyway.
So there's something here about taking the rough with the smooth. So obviously, and how that leads into kind of tips that you'd give to other speakers. Now, me and Tom have been subject to this in the last half hour, because not that any of our listeners would know, but we have, preparation has meant that you've been able to make this call despite us having probably 4 or 5 attempts at trying to kick it off, believe it or not. We won't mention any names of platforms or technologies at all. But what tips would you give to other speakers? What are the key things that you would impart as bits of knowledge to really help our listeners?
Well, I mean, the irony being, of course, is I've written 2 books on this and I'm about to write a third. So, Overcome is the first book I wrote, which is around just beginning with your public speaking. The next one is Conquer, which is about how do you get better and become an actual professional speaker. And then the last one's going to be talking about how do you get on the BBC and how do you use marketing and other things to kind of propel your own career towards the next thing. So first thing I'd say, you must probably read those books, not just in a kind of horrible plug for my own wares and services, but also because, not being glib about it, giving an answer in 30 seconds is not going to do it justice, because there's so much you could do. Hence the 2 books, right? Hence the 3 very soon. My obvious one, and people don't like obvious, but it's just because it's true, is practice. It's practice, practice, practice. Now, people believe that they don't need to, and when they see me on stage, they honestly believe that I am a talented person. I am not. I just practice more than most people do. So if I'm doing a 5-minute radio slot, I practice, and I practice it for an hour. Now, people are just like, why? But the reason why is because then it's good, right? If I do a keynote, then, for my TEDx talk in Brighton, that was 3 months of practice. Yeah, that was 15 minutes 32. I practice it so much. And as other people who've ever seen me know, I go through slides pretty quickly, and I have a certain style that I kind of do and always have done. And of course, injecting energy into the room and getting enthusiasm and inspiring people. But that doesn't come through just doing it. That comes through practice doing it. And you might think that my asides and my ad-libs are ad-libs. No, they're not. They're not ad-libs. They're things that I've done before. You might think the jokes that I've told are brand new. No, they're not. They're things I've done before. The only time when you have to be good, just like if you were a stand-up comedian, is when things happen live and things either go wrong or they go right. And that bit you can also practice, because you can work out what the questions are likely to be. What are the obstacles that are likely to be? You can't always work out what happens if the slides break. But again, that's why I'd always say, don't rely on technology. And that's why practice is key. You've got to remember that public speaking is most probably the only thing which AI won't be able to do in the future of work, right? So public speaking is literally that layer of being human, and it being live is the thing you won't be able to replicate anywhere else. So it gives you an unbelievably powerful, unique selling point for other folk. Most people would rather, sometimes if you find out the stats, people would rather die than talk to a room of 100 people. Now that's insane. For me, that's insane, right? But this is what people say. I'd rather be really, really ill than talk to 1,000 people on stage. Now, just imagine that. So you'd rather be, you'd rather not do the eulogy at your own funeral. You would rather be in the coffin. Now, think about that in real terms. That's pretty nuts, right? So, if you've got the chance to do public speaking, there's so many things you can do to make sure you're better at it. Hence the 2 books, hence Overcome, which is why I got asked to write Overcome as well, because Conquer was about how to become a great public speaker, and people were like, well, actually, I just want to get better at just speaking in front of just a room full of people. Well, there's so much. There's breathing techniques, there's practice, there's how you hold yourself, it's what you wear, it's knowing your subject, it's being passionate about what you do. That's a key one. I've met people who say they can't do public speaking, but they'll hold a whole room talking about football. And I'm like, you can do public speaking. You just didn't like the subject matter. You just spoke to me about Everton football team formation for 20 minutes, which is tremendously dull. But you held me in the palm of your hands while doing so. I don't care at all. So this proves everybody has the ability. And as I said before, I think this will be one of the things that are the differential points. So being a public speaker is actually now most probably more important than it's ever been, because everything else will be done by computers. And I think the thing that it can't do yet, and it may take a couple of years, is it can't clone you so well that it can do it live. And we are almost at the point where you can use things like Hey Jen, and it can clone you, and it can do a pre-record, yes. And so even podcasts and things like this may be able to be done by a machine. But actually, if Tom interrupts now and asks me a question, I know there'll be a 4-second delay if it was done by a machine.
That's a brilliant.
You can probably.
That's a brilliant segue, Dan, because I was just about to interrupt and ask you a question. And this may be a prompt for book number 4, because you've done lots of tips for speakers. But what about tips for event organisers from a speaker's perspective? What can they do to get the best performance out of you and other speakers?
Well, it's a brilliant question, and because I've had 9 different companies, one of them actually was an events company, so I've got both hats on this one, and as well as a marketing person as well, so I can sort of do several sides. The key one for me as a speaker is give the speaker, especially when they're good, if they're a good speaker and they're a professional speaker, you need to be able to give them the time to be flexible. You've got to be able to give them the kind of wiggle room, and also give them a fake deadline. The honest truth of the matter is, tell them that they have to have their slides in 3 days before, even though they don't. Yeah, but then don't tell them off too much when they don't. Especially because I work in AI, so it changes every day. So I have to change my slides all the time. It's not even funny how much it changes and how quickly it changes. You have to change the slides all the time. Because you have to be, ahead of the competition. That's the job of being a futurist and being a public speaker. So giving people the time, yes. I think there's also a thing where marketing is really, really important nowadays. And I think sometimes people don't put enough energy into that marketing of the speakers that are at the event. And I think that's sometimes it's a bit of a shame. And again, give the speakers the information you want to go out there so then they can change it, put it on their social media, because that helps your event anyway. But it also helps the speaker because the speaker's doing stuff and it shows the speaker's doing stuff. And don't get me wrong, not every speaker likes to talk about what they're doing and what they're doing from a marketing point of view. But you've almost got to train speakers to do that because that's your event. Like, they are your marketing device as well. So are your employees, so are other folk. The other one I would say is, and again, it's a bit of a weird one. If you can, get a professional compere rather than somebody who you think should do the job. Now, I don't mean this in a negative way, because I understand with events it's about marketing, and you're thinking, how do I position my CEO or some important person in your business? But there are ways of doing that, which doesn't mean that the boss has to be the host, because the boss being the host might make it amazing for them. She might have a lovely time, but it might not be the best event because that's what you did. They also might be amazingly talented, but if you know CEOs well, they're not always necessarily the best hosts for things. And I talk about that through experience of doing several events where the host has been the CEO. So that would be my big one, is just be careful that sometimes we can use events politically internally when actually it's an external thing. Even if you're doing an internal event, you're really marketing. And then the last one for me, and it's a big one, and I do this often. Not every speaker's happy to do this though, and that is give them as much internal information about your company as possible. If you have things that you want them to be able to say, and I have a huge amount of integrity when it comes to speaking, so I say no to gigs if it's stuff that I don't believe in. But let's say, for example, you have a big drive for hybrid work in your business, and you've got me as the speaker. I want to know what those policies are. What is the big drive? Because I can bring that into my talk. I want to know what you're up to so I can bring it in, so we can interweave the messages so it becomes a much better vehicle for you. And often, well, sometimes companies don't do that. They just go and do your future of work, come and talk about the fifth industrial revolution. Brilliant. But actually, if they told me more about what their company was doing around this fifth industrial revolution or doing around AI, and if they're happy for their employees to see that, and I think they should be, then I can talk about it. And there's lots of household names where I've been able to be a bit of an advert for what they're doing internally in their company. And it always sounds better if you've got a public speaker saying it, who's worked with the BBC and has done all this kind of cool stuff, because it's better than your CEO saying it, because they've most probably already heard the CEO saying it, or the CTO or the CIO, and they most probably kind of don't listen. You get somebody else in to talk about it, then they become more inspired. So yeah, give them the messages you can so they can interweave it into their talk, if they're happy to do so. I also know some speakers who will tell you to go away. And so you've got to be careful which speaker you hire.
So interesting. I think that's a really great place to wrap up today's interview. And, Dan, thank you so much for coming on and joining us. And thank you too for listening and watching. We hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please leave a review, like and subscribe. And most importantly, share this podcast with your colleagues and peers, whether they are fellow speakers or event organisers. And we'll be back soon with another episode. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.